This Week in Gaming. Okami HD now has a release date of December 12th for PC, Xbox One, and PS4. SteamWorld Dig 2 is coming to PC on September 22nd. Overwatch is having a free weekend from September 22nd to 25th, and apparently, player toxicity has slowed down the game's development. The Humble Bundles have raised $100 million for charity. The Nintendo Switch outsold the PS4 and Xbox One in August. We dig into RTS Tooth and Tail, and Microsoft has finally admitted that the Windows 10 Creators Update has hurt game performance. This is 1RBC Gaming Weekly.
Welcome back, everyone, to another developer update. I'm Jeff from the Overwatch team, and today's developer update is going to be a little bit different than the normal ones we do.
First off, Overwatch game director Jeff Kaplan this week released a video on the topic of toxicity within the game. Much like any other competitively oriented game, Overwatch has issues with angry players sending nasty messages to one another. Mr. Kaplan talked about the game's report system, specifically that it's finally coming to consoles, and that when you report a player for toxic behavior, you'll receive a message letting you know that disciplinary action has been taken. Unfortunately, some other features of the game that Blizzard wanted to include have been delayed due to the need to improve the game's report system. Toxic players have literally slowed down their development. Personally, I think these improvements are a step in the right direction. I used to play Dota 2 back in the day, so I've had my fair share of salt poisoning, let's say. While I never abused other players, I did see other people behaving badly. Things began to improve, however, when Valve started letting players know that their reports had made a difference to the game. It was always satisfying starting up Dota and seeing that Valve had really listened when I'd reported players. Toxicity is a serious problem for multiplayer games. This week there was a rather high-profile incident in EVE Online. One really big player, after being betrayed by another really big player, threatened said player with serious bodily harm. Specifically, this guy threatened to cut off the other guy's hands. As a result of this threat, the player was permanently banned from the game. What do you think? Is improving the reporting tools the right move for Overwatch? Is it too little too late? Is it better to let players know that their reports are making a difference? And do you think that Blizzard should be doing more to combat toxicity? Let us know on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool. We'd be happy to share your thoughts on next week's episode.
I've said mean things on the internet.
This week, Humble released a video in celebration of having raised over $100 million for various charities throughout the years. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with Humble, they're the folks responsible for the Humble Bundles. These started in 2010 as the Humble Indie Bundles. Cross-platform, DRM-free, pay what you want, helps charity. That's how they started. You could just drop a few dollars and receive a bunch of great games. These guys have helped put some fantastic indie games and studios on the map, and at the same time, they've raised a ton of money for an assortment of charities. Take a look.
Hello, Humble Bundle. Greetings from South Sudan. I want to thank you for being such an amazing partner in our fight against hunger. Thanks to your support, we're able to provide very much needed help to the population here. So thank you once again for being a partner and for continuing supporting us.
Thanks to your incredible generosity, we've helped provide access to clean water to 75,000 people over 7 countries. So from all of us here at Charity Water, thank you, thank you, thank you.
To each one of you who's helped Special Effect transform the lives of so many more disabled gamers everywhere, thank you.
Thank you, Humble Bundle.
Thank you so much for being part of everything that we've been able to do with your help. Way to go.
Anyone that supported the Jingle Jam, there's something that we want to say.
Thank you, Humble Bundle, for joining the fight for a world without cancer.
You're awesome. It's incredible. There's no words. We love you. Live long.
From all of us at Extra Life, thank you, Humble Bundle.
Thank you, Humble Bundle. Thanks, Humble Bundle.
To the whole Humble Bundle community that makes our work possible, thank you!
From all of us here at Humble Bundle, thank you.
In Nintendo news this week, Nintendo announced that the NES Classic Edition will be available again during the summer of 2018. In case you're unfamiliar with the device, it's a miniaturized version of the Nintendo Entertainment System that comes with a bunch of games built in. The system was a hot seller. Nintendo, however, only had them available to buy for a limited period of time and in insufficient quantity. From the looks of things, it seemed like a classic case of farts, or forced artificial scarcity. The skinny of it is that it looked like Nintendo was trying to keep demand for the devices high by making them harder to come by. It was very profitable, but, like most farts, it left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Hopefully they'll be making more this time. The next device in line to get this treatment, the SNES Classic, is coming out on September 29th of this year. As you may rightly assume, pre-orders for that device are sold out. This week, Nintendo held one of their direct video conferences detailing upcoming Switch and 3DS games. They opened with the upcoming Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon, which are coming out this November and will be receiving the legendary Pokemon Necrozma in 2 new forms, having merged with the legendaries of Sun and Moon. There will also be new regions of Alola to discover, and purchasing Pokemon Gold and Silver on the 3DS eShop results in your receiving Celebi in Sun and Moon, so long as you purchase the game anytime between its eShop release on September 22nd of this year and September 21st of 2018. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was shown off during the Direct. Set to be released December 1st, 2017, this ARPG has a lot of folks excited. Its predecessor came to the Wii thanks to a fan campaign called Operation Rainfall, during which thousands of gamers organized in order to show their support for localizing the game. It wound up getting localized in English and turned out to be one of the best games you could get on the Wii. In fact, it was a hot seller during the system's final days. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 seems to have the same open-world design of its predecessor, along with some other mechanical elements. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, however, doesn't appear to be a follow-up to the previous game, but instead centers around a young dude named Rex and his relationship with a sentient sword who's also a girl. Sorta like Transistor, but with the roles reversed. There was a bit of news regarding an update coming to Splatoon 2. Specifically that the Kelp Dome level from the original Splatoon is coming in an update to its sequel. A brand new level, Snapper Canal, is also coming down the pipes along with a fancy new umbrella weapon that shoots paint and serves as a shield. How woomy. If arcade gaming is more your thing, the original Mario Bros. And other Nintendo arcade games are coming to the Switch on September 27, 2017. These are the Mario Bros. Pre-Super. Some of these other upcoming arcade games are Versus versions, such as Versus Clu Clu Land and Versus Balloon Fight. They've got some differences from their NES counterparts, so if you've already played those, you might want to take a look at the arcade versions of the game. One of Nintendo's most interesting games from their presentation was Octopath Traveler. Set to be released in 2018 for the Switch, this RPG is coming from the developers of I Am Setsuna. Its style mashes up nostalgic pixel art and fancy 3D environments. While it does have a pretty dumb working title, is it a game about cephalopods on the road? I don't know. The game itself looks pretty promising. Based on the character and class you're playing as, different methods of handling problems will be open to you. If you're playing as the knight-type character, you can duel with anybody. Guards won't let you into the building? Duel them. On the other hand, if you're playing as the dancer, you're going to have to pick a more diplomatic approach. Finally, new colors of existing game hardware were announced. Nintendo unveiled the orange and white new 2DS XL coming out October 6th, as well as a special Pokeball edition of the 2DS coming out on November 3rd. In game releases this week, Minecraft came to the Nintendo 3DS. This was a nice surprise, though it's not entirely unprecedented, since the game's been available on mobile devices for quite a while. That said, it's not going to run on just any 3DS. It requires the new 3DS, which is a model with more RAM and processing power than the original. Will this now Microsoft-owned blockbuster fare well on Nintendo's old handheld in its twilight years? Time shall tell. It's worth bearing in mind that this version of the game has some limitations. Worlds are limited to 2016 by 2016 blocks and 128 high, and it doesn't have all the content that's available on other platforms. That said, Mojang is planning on bringing in new content with updates, so if you're waiting on tameable zebras, just wait a little while longer. In 1991, Metroid 2: Return of Samus was released on the Game Boy. It was a pretty good entry in the series, and this week it received a bit of an update in the form of Metroid Samus Returns, which is now available on the Nintendo 3DS. This remake includes fresh gameplay elements, such as the ability to fire in more than a few square directions, the ability to parry, and, as you may rightly assume, massively improved visuals. Additionally, Samus Returns includes an expanded map with much more to explore than its source material. In case you are somehow unfamiliar with the Metroid-style games, what you should know is that they pioneered platformers with big, open worlds. Instead of just running forward in one direction, you have to move up, down, left, right through the levels, backtracking as you pick up new abilities that enable you to do things that were previously impossible. Now, the Metroid series has had a massive impact on the world of game design. If you've never played any of the games in the series, Samus Returns is a great place to start. Trulon, the Shadow Engine, was released on PS4 this week, and honestly, it doesn't seem like anything to be that excited for. The game was previously released on PC and Xbox One, and it received some pretty mixed reviews. Apparently this RPG is disappointingly short, plagued by bugs, and generally lacking in the gameplay department. It gets boring after a while. While its card-based combat system is clever, it's not enough to make Trulon truly worth playing. Sadly, all this game really has going for it are its aesthetics.
I do not do this for glory. Are you awake?
It was just a dream.
No, it's okay. Tell me what happened.
Adventure game The First Tree was released on Steam this week. It's a walking simulator of sorts set in the wilds of Alaska. It's made of parallel stories. On the one hand, it's about an estranged father and son trying to reconnect, the other about a fox trying to find its family, and eventually the two stories connect in a way. It's not a very long game. You can apparently beat it in a bit over an hour. That said, it's been garnering pretty positive user reviews, and it seems that folks really love the game's look. Visually, The First Tree is stunning. The game's graphics are all the more impressive when you realize that they were created by a single person, David Whale, who's also responsible for everything else in the game aside from its music. The First Tree is available for Windows and Mac.
It's a difficult path to the first tree, but each of us must eventually take it, including me.
A pretty unusual game called Trackless was released on Steam this week, and it caught my eye. It's a brief, narrative-focused first-person adventure game in which you have to type out words in order to solve puzzles. Remember the old parser-based interactive fiction from the days of yore? This is a little bit like that. The user reviews have been pretty positive thus far, while it seems that some folks have found one puzzle in particular to be unusually frustrating. Overall, players seem to be describing it as striking the right balance between challenging and relaxing. Trackless is available for Mac, Windows, and Linux.
Trackless on Steam for Mac, Linux, and PC.
You may have heard of Mike Biffle. He's the indie developer behind the incredibly clever narrative puzzle platformer Thomas Was Alone and stealth game Volume. This week he released a brand new game called Subsurface Circular. This time it's a detective game in which you're a robot riding a train and interviewing other robots in order to try and figure out why their mechanical fellows have been disappearing. Thus far, the player reviews have been incredibly positive. I haven't tried this one, but it's pretty high on my to-play list now. Interestingly enough, the game has a 2% refund rate according to Mr. Biffle. In spite of the game's brief length, it seems that gamers not only appreciate the work that went into the writing, but are willing to part with their money in exchange for quality over quantity. All things considered, this sort of makes sense. The age of the average gamer is rising, and a 500-hour RPG overstuffed with narrative filler and grinding is a lot less appealing to somebody with kids and a job than a brief, rich narrative experience. At least, that's the conclusion that I've been drawing. What do you think? Are busy gamers going to prefer rich, shorter narrative experiences to lengthy epics? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool with your thoughts. If you're a PC gamer but you're more fond of strategy games, this was a pretty good week. The game Oriental Empires left early access on Steam this week, and thus far, it seems to be picking up somewhat mixed reviews. It's a grand strategy game set in medieval China, with gameplay that draws on the Total War series as well as Sid Meier's Civilization. From what I've heard, however, it doesn't do enough to differentiate itself from the competition, and the AI has some bizarre problems. While it does have some interesting mechanics, you might want to hold off on purchasing this one until it receives some much-needed polish. Oriental Empires is available for Windows. A strategy game that I've been waiting a long time for, Tooth and Tail, is now out on Steam and PS4, and it has a pretty interesting style. The developers describe it as a popcorn RTS, built with brief matches in mind. 5 to 12 minutes, in fact. I've actually been playing the game since last week, and I really love it. While most of the matches have lasted closer to 10 minutes than 5, I have to say that I dig the incredibly entertaining single-player mode, with its rich story and great music, and the multiplayer matches are exciting and dynamic. I'm going to give you my first impressions of Tooth and Tail at the end of this episode, so stay tuned. The game Kingdom New Lands was released on the Switch this week. Previously released on Mac, Windows, and Linux, as well as consoles, it's a side-scrolling strategy game. You heard that right, folks. In case you're new to the world of gaming, you should know that that's considered unusual, as strategy games are usually from a top-down perspective. So instead of scrolling around from above like you would in Google Maps, in this game you're running back and forth like you're Mario. From what I've heard, the game is both challenging and enigmatic, and it's gotten pretty good reviews. Some folks aren't too fond of its strange design, so check out the reviews first, but you may want to pick it up if you're looking for a good mobile strategy game for your Switch. A studio called Lucid Games has dropped a trailer for a free team-based racing action game called Switchblade this week. From the sounds of things, there will be towers to take down kind of MOBA style, which sounds interesting. What really caught my attention about this game is that it's being worked on by some of the developers of Blur, a game which I played the beta of, loved, and regret not purchasing. This new game is set to be released on the PS4 and PC sometime in 2018. You can sign up for the beta right now. Finally, we leave you with the trailer for Okami HD, set to be released on Windows, PS4, and Xbox One on December 12, 2017. It's a remaster of the classic 3D platformer that will feature 4K support, and thus far, it is looking gorgeous. Enjoy! Well, that's it for this week's game news. For all the greatest game news, reviews, interviews, and editorials, be sure to follow at OneRuleBeCool on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views. To be completely honest, I wasn't sure of what I was walking into with Tooth and Tail. I'd heard about the game a while ago while it was initially announced, and I thought that it looked incredible, and then I mostly forgot about it until quite recently, when it came time to try it out. I knew it to be a real-time strategy game of some sort featuring mice and other woodland creatures, sort of like the Redwall books of my childhood, albeit in a setting more reminiscent of the Bolshevik Revolution. To describe the game briefly, you, the player, control a commanding unit that's used to rally other units to your current location. Your army of squirrels and other animals can only go to places that you've previously been, and it always moves as an army. You can't take control of individual units, but you can tell a specific group of similar units, your hawks for instance, to gather in a particular location, while instructing your moles to go elsewhere. Now, in order to pay for these animals, you need to feed them. In order to obtain food, you must seize the means of production by taking hold of gristmills and building farms around them. As the game progresses, the farms begin to go fallow. That is to say, they stop producing fresh resources, meaning that you must continue to seize gristmills in order to build new farms. Using the food from gristmills, you build warrens. These structures spawn a set amount of animals, such as a trio of swashbuckling lizards or a single fox. Tooth and Tail boasts a pretty diverse campaign. I'm currently in the process of playing through it. I'm around the halfway mark, and I have to say that it's surprisingly challenging. It does a great job introducing the mechanics of individual units by presenting challenges for said units to try and overcome, while also offering players an optional secondary objective for a heroic finish, such as surviving a level with only a few units and without creating any extras. Now, a large part of what makes the game's campaign so exciting are its procedurally generated levels. You may struggle on a level when you discover that your base has spawned surrounded by unfriendly units in an awkward position, but on another playthrough, you may wind up in a more ideal location. So on the one hand, the randomness of the maps adds a nice extra layer of challenge, forcing you to improve your strategy on a game-by-game basis. On the other hand, if you are uncomfortable with losing a bit of control over the location of your key resources and deciding where your base spawns, you might take issue with Tooth and Tail. The game's multiplayer mode is dynamic and every bit as challenging as the single-player campaign. Thanks to the random nature of the maps, you can never be sure where you'll spawn. You might wind up in the middle of everything, open to attack on all sides, or you might get a gristmill on a hill surrounded by water. Now, either setup might serve you well, depending on what loadout of units you chose at the start of the match. Instead of having preordained classes with a few units pre-selected, Tooth and Tail allows you to pick how you'll balance your team of units. Will you go for a Zerg Rush-style strategy with squirrels and lizards and lightweight cheap units? Will you go all heavy, or will you perhaps choose a structure-oriented defensive turtling strategy? Worth keeping in mind is that the length of a multiplayer game is decided by when farms go fallow. If your food production halts entirely, you face a state of starvation. You'll have a minute to set up a new gristmill and farms or lose the game entirely. The fallow mechanic creates some very interesting wars of attrition. As you lose units, it becomes increasingly expensive to replace them as food production slows down. Hence, the game is kept moving forward as you have to work frantically to keep finding empty gristmills, seize your opponent's farms, and maintain control over your own resources. The multiplayer experience doesn't always feel fair. In much the same way you might be dealt a rough hand in a card game, you might wind up on a hard map in Tooth and Tail. That said, it is always interesting to see what sort of terrain you'll have to deal with, and adapting your strategy on the fly is always exciting. Also worth mentioning is that the game supports both local and online multiplayer. In fact, you can enjoy a split-screen game with a local player and team up to defeat another pair of players online. It's not too often that games support this style of multiplayer, so if you've been looking for a strategy game that you can enjoy with your friends on the same machine, Tooth and Tail may be what you're looking for. If you don't want to play with other people but enjoy non-story related skirmishes, you also have the choice to play against the computer. The game's story switches between the perspective of different characters during the campaign. You can play as the revolutionary rabble, move on to the authoritative powers that be, etc. Now, the game's themes of revolution, the nature of authority, the seizure of power, and social upheaval, all these extend through its story and world-building quite well. The animals are clearly thrust into well-defined social castes in the world of Tooth and Tail. It's a dog, eat mouse, eat squirrel world. Some seem to reject this structure, whereas others seek to maintain it, while yet others are seeking to take advantage of it to advance their own station. The pigs, for some reason, just don't question why they live the way that they do. It's very much like George Orwell's Animal Farm. The story kicks off with a cutscene explaining the struggle of the first character that you play as, a longcoat, an upperclassman of sorts. This guy finally loses patience with the ruling classes after they decide to eat his son. To be fair, these are mice, basically nature's hors d'oeuvres, but it's the inciting incident for revolution. It's like Les Miserables meets Animal Farm. The story is largely told through dialogue and conversations, so be sure to pay attention when the characters are speaking. Now, I do have a little gripe about the game's presentation, namely that if you want to go back and play a mission, you have to go through the dialogue that gives the mission's backstory all over again. It's not a big deal, as the conversations are kept pretty brief, but it is a minor nuisance. It would be a mistake to talk about Tooth and Tail without mentioning its fantastic aesthetic. The characters are composed in a very blocky pixel art style that seems a little reminiscent of Super Brothers. It's obvious what the individual creatures are, mice or skunks, but they dance along the lines of utilitarian pixel art and abstract design. There are nice big pieces of more traditional art splashed across the screens for victories and defeats, and the same sort of art is used to represent different units when you choose them. A small touch, but a welcome one. Further, the game's score, by Banner Saga composer Austin Wintory, is tremendous and beautiful. There are a lot of big choral flourishes, but there are also nicely percussive, gentle pieces that almost sound a bit like they're being played on a, I want to say balalaika, but I don't want to jump to any conclusions. I'd have to ask Mr. Wintory. That said, I would not be surprised if he did go through the trouble of getting traditional Russian folk instruments. The game's aesthetic, after all, is largely inspired by the early 20th century Russian Revolution. Austin Wintory is a composer who tends to go the extra step for realism. He used Viking instruments for the Banner Saga. Using real Russian instruments for this game, not a stretch. In all, I've been enjoying my time with Tooth and Tail, and I definitely plan on playing more. I'll most likely have more to say about it in an upcoming episode of Other Games Can Learn From, which I very definitely plan on producing more of. Have you been playing Tooth and Tail? If so, what do you think about it? Hit us up on Twitter and follow at OneRuleBeCool for all the greatest game news, interviews, and editorials. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views.